The air in the Bentley Mulsanne was frigid, despite the warm October afternoon sun blazing outside the tinted windows of Greenwich, Connecticut. Eleanor Vance, or Ellie as she preferred, adjusted the thin wool shawl around her shoulders. She was seated in the expansive back seat, feeling smaller than the worn leather briefcase resting on her lap. Beside her, her son, Ethan, stared straight ahead, his jaw locked, the expensive grey suit straining across his shoulders. In the front, Serena, her daughter-in-law, was taking a selfie with the rearview mirror, her smile wide and artificial, the flash of her diamond engagement ring catching Ellie's eye. "Don't look so glum, Mother," Serena chirped, lowering her phone, her voice dripping with a forced sweetness that grated on Ellie's nerves like sandpaper on fine wood. "Bridgeport isn't the Sahara. It's only a 30-minute drive. You'll be settled in by 5. Ethan finally spoke, his tone a carefully modulated blend of martyrdom and financial prudence. "We've been over this, Mum. The cost of maintaining Willow Creek, plus your increasing medical expenses, it's unsustainable. We're talking about $40,000 a month in property taxes and utilities alone. The trust fund, the one Dad set up to cover your living expenses, is simply stretched too thin. This is a pragmatic decision, the fiscally responsible decision." Ellie closed her eyes, trying to conjure the image of her late husband, Thomas, a man whose word had been his bond, whose love had been her fortress. Thomas, who had always insisted she never worry about money. She clutched the briefcase tighter, the weight of the sealed documents inside a cold comfort against the heat of her shame. They had lied to her. They had meticulously fabricated a narrative of financial ruin over the past 6 months, preying on her recent bout of pneumonia and her subsequent weakness. They painted Willow Creek, the sprawling, $30 million estate Thomas had built for her, as a millstone, a financial black hole draining their future. Pragmatic. Ellie repeated the word quietly, testing its taste. It tasted like ash. "You told me I was going for a 3-week physical therapy retreat. You packed 2 suitcases for me. You said the best care was at St. Jude's, not this." Serena scoffed, turning fully around now, her designer perfume filling the enclosed space with a cloying scent. "Oh, please, Mother Vance. Cut the melodrama. St. Jude's is for serious people. Meadowbrook is perfectly adequate for someone who just needs custodial care. The brochure called it a vibrant community. Besides, we need to start the renovations immediately. That hideous floral wallpaper in the parlor has to go. And the pool house. It's going to be a yoga studio. We need to maximize the space before the spring gala." Ellie opened her eyes and met her son's gaze in the rearview mirror. Ethan quickly looked away, adjusting his tie. He couldn't meet her eyes, not since she had overheard Serena telling her friend that Ellie was just occupying valuable real estate. The realization hit her again with the force of a physical blow. They weren't sending her away for her health. They were removing a fixture, an obstacle, the lingering scent of her authority and the past. The Bentley glided off the highway, leaving the pristine lawns and towering stone gates of Greenwich behind, plunging into the gritty, less manicured streets of Bridgeport. The contrast was immediate and jarring. The air grew heavier, the buildings smaller, and the silence in the car became a suffocating weight. Finally, they pulled up to a structure that looked less like a vibrant community and more like a converted, dated motel, the Meadowbrook Assisted Living Facility. The brick facade was faded, and a single plastic flamingo stood forlornly in a patch of dry grass near the entrance sign. The parking lot was small, the asphalt cracked. Ethan didn't wait for the driver to open the door. He jumped out, eager to finish the transaction. Serena, however, paused, turning back to Ellie with a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Look, let's be honest, Mother Vance," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. We need the house. We deserve the house. Ethan worked hard for his career, and frankly, sitting in that enormous house all alone was just depressing. It looked bad for our image. It looked poor. You should be thanking us for simplifying your life. Think of all the money you'll save on maintenance. Ellie felt the familiar ache of rejection deepen into a searing burn of betrayal. This was not the child she had raised, the boy she had tutored through late nights and celebrated with every small triumph. This was a callous, calculating adult, consumed by avarice and molded by the even colder influence of his wife. Serena, Ellie managed, her voice trembling slightly, but still clear. I gave you both everything. I supported Ethan's every step, even when his father had doubts. I handed you Willow Creek, my home, to raise your family in, to spare you the financial burdens Thomas and I faced early on. I entrusted you with my life. Serena gave a brittle laugh. Exactly. And now we're managing it. Efficiently. She stepped out, smoothing her fitted skirt. Come on. Ethan's waiting. Let's get this over with. The process inside was swift and brutal. The facility smelled of cheap disinfectant and cooked cabbage. The walls were painted a nauseating pale green. They were met by a woman named Brenda, whose polyester uniform and overly cheerful demeanor did nothing to mask the underlying institutional indifference. Room 106. Right this way, Mrs. Vance, Brenda chirped, gliding down the hallway ahead of them. The rooms were small, identical cells of barely contained despair. Room 106. It was tiny, a narrow bed, a plastic nightstand, and a single window overlooking the back alley and a dumpster. There was barely enough space for her two small suitcases. Cozy, Serena announced, her tone a sharp irony. She wrinkled her nose, pulling her dress away from the wall. Look, Ethan, this is perfect. Nice and compact. Low maintenance. Ethan avoided Ellie's eyes, speaking rapidly to the social worker about paperwork. He handed Ellie a small white envelope. This is a prepaid debit card, Mum, he said, his voice clipped and businesslike. We've loaded it with $1,000 for discretionary expenses. That should cover incidentals, maybe a new pair of slippers or a good book. We'll replenish it quarterly, just don't lose it. It's hard to track these things down here. The gesture, $1,000, for a woman who held the sole claim to a secret trust worth $50 million, was the most obscene humiliation of all. It wasn't just the small amount. It was the chilling, transactional nature of the exchange. It was the complete dismissal of her worth, reducing her life to a quarterly stipend, a burden they were reluctantly managing. Ellie looked from the card to the small, miserable room, then finally to her son's face. She saw no love, no regret, only relief. He was shedding a weight, and she was that weight. You're leaving now, aren't you, Ethan? She asked, her voice low, drained of emotion. He nodded, avoiding her gaze. Yeah, Serena and I have a meeting with the contractor. We want to start knocking down the wall between the kitchen and the sunroom immediately. It's going to be huge. And we're having a small party tomorrow evening to celebrate the renovation. Just a few close friends, to generate some buzz before the holidays. Serena grabbed Ethan's arm, tugging him towards the door. We'll call you next week, Mother Vance. Try to be cheerful, okay? It's not a prison. The irony of her words, given the cold, barred nature of the place, was breathtaking. And then they were gone. Not a kiss, not an embrace, not a promise to visit soon. Just a hurried, final exit, leaving behind the lingering scent of expensive cologne and the crushing echo of the slammed door. Ellie stood utterly still in the middle of the Meadowbrook Assisted Living Facility's room 106. Her small world had just been reduced to 8 square feet of institutional flooring. She didn't cry. The pain was too vast, too absolute for tears. Tears were for grief. And this was not grief. This was a total, blinding, searing betrayal that consumed every nerve ending. She walked slowly to the small, depressing window. The sun was still high, but the light that filtered into the room felt dirty. She looked down at the briefcase on the floor. It contained her life, not her clothes or her memories, but the key to everything. She sank onto the hard bed, the thin mattress offering no comfort. She didn't dwell on the $1,000. She didn't dwell on the hideous wallpaper they planned to tear out of her Willow Creek parlor. She focused only on the cold, hard certainty that had bloomed in the void where her maternal love had once resided. The certainty of a plan. The plan she and Thomas had drafted years ago, after his first heart scare. The plan they had hoped would never be necessary. Thomas had been a shrewd man. He had seen the warning signs in his only son, the entitled glimmer in Ethan's eye, the way Serena had zeroed in on the family wealth. They had prepared for the worst-case scenario, the Vance Investment Trust, holding assets far exceeding the Willow Creek residents, structured to keep the principal secure and the existence of the trust itself a complete secret. And the deed to Willow Creek, the legal instrument that gave Ethan and Serena the confidence to act with such impunity, was the centerpiece of the counter-strategy. The moment of total despair had passed. It was replaced by an unnerving, icy calm. Ellie reached for her small suitcase. She pulled out an old, beat-up mobile phone, a relic that could only make calls, and wasn't traceable through the fancy systems Ethan used to track her regular cell phone. She opened the briefcase, pulling out a small, leather-bound notebook. She flipped to the last page, where a single number was written beneath a coded reference. A. Finch. Code 83 to W. Alistair Finch. Thomas's most trusted attorney, the man who drafted every intricate clause of the Vance estate. The only other person who knew the truth about the Vance Trust and the highly unusual deed of life estate granted to Ethan. Her finger hovered over the dial button. Her hands, which only moments ago had been shaking with shock, were now steady. She pressed the number. It rang once, twice. Finch and Associates, Alistair Finch speaking. The lawyer's voice was crisp and professional. Alistair, it's Eleanor Vance. I have been placed at Meadowbrook Assisted Living Facility in Bridgeport. She spoke quietly, clearly, her tone entirely factual, devoid of accusation or emotion. There was a brief, stunned silence on the other end of the line. Ellie, Mrs. Vance, I'm so sorry. I heard whispers that Ethan was making some changes, but I had no idea. Are you all right? I am perfectly well, Ellie said, her gaze fixed on the plastic nightstand. I am calling you to activate the final clause of the Willow Creek contingency, code 83.W. You know what to do. Alistair Finch's composure returned instantly, the professional training kicking in. Understood, Mrs. Vance. Code 83.W confirmed. That means the deed of life estate is hereby immediately and irrevocably terminated. Correct. And the accompanying demand for immediate payment, Ellie reminded him. Yes, the demand for the accrued rental value, retroactive to the date the life estate was granted, or immediate evacuation of the premises within 24 hours. Ellie paused, then clarified the exact demand amount one last time. Alistair, I want the demand for the full market rental rate for the past 24 months. Calculate that at $40,000 per month. Alistair whistled softly, a small professional sound of surprise. That totals $960,000, Mrs. Vance, a steep price, especially when coupled with the immediate termination. Ethan and Serena will never be able to produce that kind of capital in one day. Exactly, Ellie said, her voice dry. They have one day to become millionaires, or they must vacate the premises which they believe is their home. I need the legal notice delivered to the Willow Creek residents tonight. I want it delivered during their renovation party. Tonight, during the party, Alistair confirmed, writing rapidly. Understood. I will have a process server execute the delivery this evening. Consider it done, Mrs. Vance. Is there anything else? Yes. You must not, under any circumstances, reveal the true owner of the Willow Creek residence or the existence of the Vance Trust. The legal action is to be taken solely by the named entity on the deed, the W.C. Holding Corp. I want them to panic and speculate, but never know the true source. The anonymity will be maintained. W.C. Holding Corp. will file the motion and deliver the notice. Their son and daughter-in-law will simply be notified that the terms of the life estate they believed granted them an indefinite, rent-free occupancy have been violated, and the estate has been terminated. The lease is nullified, and the rent is due. We will treat them as squatters. Perfect, Alistair. I will call you tomorrow morning for the update. She ended the call. The silence in room 106 was no longer filled with the raw ache of humiliation, but with the cold, deliberate focus of a strategic mind. The game had just begun. Her humiliation was the currency she was spending for justice. Meanwhile, in the pristine, 20-room Willow Creek residence in Greenwich, the atmosphere was a cacophony of celebration and self-congratulation. It was 7:30 p.m., and the renovation party was in full swing. Ethan and Serena stood in the grand foyer, receiving their well-heeled guests. Serena was radiant in an emerald green gown, her voice animated as she described the vision for the house. "We're tearing down the wall right here," she announced, gesturing dramatically towards the heavy mahogany paneling Thomas had custom-installed 20 years ago. "The dining room is going to open right into the library. We need an open-concept flow." Mother Vance's tastes were a little dated. Think Miami modern meets New England chic. Ethan, nursing a 30-year-old single malt scotch that had belonged to his father, beamed with proprietary pride. "It's about making the place ours," he told a business associate. It was time. Mum was just rattling around in here, and frankly, the maintenance was a beast. We finally had to make the hard choice. But you know, we took care of her. Meadowbrook is actually quite nice. He lied effortlessly, the sound of the words barely registering against the clinking of champagne flutes. Serena pulled Ethan aside, her excitement making her eyes glitter. "Did you see the look on Candace's face when I mentioned the infinity pool? She is so jealous. Remember, we need to finalize the demolition permit tomorrow. We have to make sure that old woman's furniture is gone before the crews arrive. I swear, if I see that hideous beige armchair one more time." Ethan smirked, taking a long sip of scotch. "It's done, darling. Alistair Finch's office is handling the transfer paperwork. Mum signed the life estate over years ago, the moment Dad died. It's ironclad. She signed all her interests over to me. She may have been using the trust's income to cover the bills, but the property itself has been mine, in principle, for 5 years. We just had to wait for the right time to move her." "And the right time was when she was too weak to fight," Serena finished, a cold, predatory smile playing on her lips. They toasted with a triumphant clink of their glasses. They felt invincible. They had orchestrated a seamless, guilt-free takeover of a $30 million estate, and the old woman, their only obstacle, was safely warehoused in Bridgeport. The Vance fortune was theirs, At exactly 8:15 p.m., as Serena was mid-sentence, describing the imported Italian marble she planned to use for the new master bathroom, a discreet event took place at the front door. A man in a plain suit, carrying a standard brown envelope, approached the butler, who was checking the guest list. The man identified himself as a process server. The butler, confused, asked to speak to Mr. Vance. Ethan, annoyed at the interruption to his victory lap, walked over. "Yes, what is this? We're hosting an event." The process server remained impassive. "Mr. Ethan Vance and Ms. Serena Vance, I am legally required to serve you with these documents from WC Holding Corp. Please sign to confirm receipt." Ethan glanced at the envelope, noting the corporate name, a generic, meaningless name that looked like junk mail, and the cold formality of the letterhead. He signed quickly, irritably, without looking at the details. "Right. Thanks. Now, if you'll excuse me." He handed the envelope to Serena, dismissing the server entirely. The man turned and left. "What's this rubbish?" Serena asked, her brow furrowed, her good mood momentarily dampened. "Some legal junk mail," Ethan dismissed, pulling her back into the room. "Forget about it. Come on, let's go show the Goldbergs the view from the turret room. They're thinking of listing their place, and I want them to be envious." Serena tossed the brown envelope onto the antique cherrywood console table in the foyer, where it blended in with the discarded invitation cards and flower arrangements. They returned to the party, their triumph momentarily interrupted, but quickly restored by the flow of expensive wine and the admiring glances of their peers. The legal documents sat, sealed and ominous, waiting for the party to end. Ellie, miles away in her tiny room, knew the papers had been delivered. Alistair Finch had confirmed the server's successful drop. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The hook had been set. The waiting was the hardest part, but also the most satisfying. She knew that the realization of the disaster would not sink in immediately. It would come later, when the guests were gone and the liquor had worn off. The true, agonizing bottom of their U-curve. She took the small prepaid debit card Ethan had left her, walked across the hallway to the Meadowbrook communal telephone, and slid the card into the slot. She donated the entire $1,000 to a local animal shelter. She no longer needed their charity. She needed only silence, and the knowledge that the law, cold and impartial, was on her side. The following morning at Willow Creek residence was messy. The house reeked of stale champagne and cigarette smoke. Ethan woke up on the imported silk sheets, feeling triumphant but hungover. Serena was already up, sitting on the edge of the bed in her robe, her face pale, her eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly turning to panic. The discarded brown envelope from the night before lay open in her lap. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice tight, strangled. "Ethan, you need to look at this. Immediately." He groaned, sitting up. "What? It's probably a property tax increase. Just pay it. We can afford it now." "No, it's not an increase. It's a notice from a corporation called WC Holding Corp." Her hands shook as she held out the thick legal papers. "They say they are the owners of the Willow Creek residence, not you. And they say that the deed of life estate Mother Vance signed was terminated 3 months ago due to a breach of contract." Ethan scoffed, grabbing the papers and scanning them with a dismissive air. "What utter garbage! She signed it to me 5 years ago. Alistair Finch confirmed it was mine, legally. This is just some bottom-feeding lawyer trying to scam us." But as he read, the colour slowly drained from his face. The documents were notarized, dated, and stamped by the state of Connecticut Superior Court. They were not junk mail. They were deadly serious. WC Holding Corp., Ethan murmured, his mind racing. Who the hell is that? And what breach? What contract? Serena pointed to a bolded paragraph, her finger trembling. It says that by moving the grantor, that's your mother, out of the residence, you violated the explicit, non-negotiable term of the life estate, which required the grantor's uninterrupted free-of-charge occupancy until death. It says the action of removal constitutes a breach of the life estate covenant and triggers an automatic, immediate revocation of the deed, effective yesterday. The realization was a punch to the gut. They hadn't just moved her out, they had signed their own eviction notice. But she signed the life estate over to me. It was supposed to protect me, Ethan shouted, leaping out of bed and pacing the expensive wooden floor. It protected her, Serena wailed, tears beginning to stream down her flawless, manicured face. Read the next part. They are demanding immediate payment of the fair market rental value for the 24 months you have lived here rent-free, citing that the life estate was fraudulent ab initio due to the prior breach. They want $960,000, due today, by 5 p.m. Ethan stopped dead. $960,000. That was their entire renovation fund. They had access to their regular savings, but nowhere near $1 million in liquid, accessible funds on a Tuesday afternoon. The house was supposed to be collateral for the renovation loan, but if the deed was no longer in his name— "And if we don't pay?" he asked, his voice hoarse, afraid of the answer. Serena pointed to the final sentence on the front page. If payment is not received by 5 p.m., they will file an immediate writ of ejectment and begin the legal process to forcibly remove us, citing us as illegal squatters in a property owned by the WC Holding Corp. We have 24 hours from the time of service to vacate the premises or pay the nearly $1 million in back rent. The silence that followed was absolute, a chilling contrast to the celebratory noise of the night before. They were homeless. The $30 million estate they had just taken by force was now completely out of their reach. And the one person who could possibly shed light on this, the one person who had been so easily dismissed and discarded, was their mother, sitting miles away in a cheap, foul-smelling room. "Call Alistair Finch," Ethan commanded, grabbing his phone, his mind racing for a solution. "He drew up the papers. He'll know the loophole. Tell him it's an emergency." Serena frantically scrolled through her contacts, but Alistair Finch's office did not pick up. It was only 8 a.m. By 9 a.m., Finch had called back. His tone was professional, distant, and utterly devoid of sympathy. "Alistair, what the hell is going on?" Ethan demanded. "This letter from WC Holding Corp. is absurd. They're claiming the life estate is void. I need you to fight this immediately. This is my house." "Mr. Vance, I am legally bound not to discuss the affairs of my other clients, the WC Holding Corp., Alistair said calmly. "However, I can confirm that the life estate you held was terminated. The clause regarding the grantor's occupancy was ironclad, non-negotiable, and was highlighted clearly in the original documents. By removing Mrs. Vance to the Meadowbrook facility, you violated the terms of the deed. The termination is automatic and immediate." "But my mother told me she was fine with it. She said she needed the care," Ethan stammered, his composure completely fractured. "Did you have that in writing, Mr. Vance?" Alistair countered, his voice like ice. "A written, signed waiver from your mother, confirming that she willingly relinquished her primary occupancy right and terminated her life estate, because the trust only accepts legal, written, notarized documentation of such a major change. Verbal assurances are insufficient." Silence. Ethan had no such document. He had relied on his mother's passive acceptance and his own arrogant assumption of control. "Who is WC? Holding Corp?" Serena screamed in the background. "Tell us, who owns this house now?" "I am legally prevented from revealing the ownership structure of my clients, Mrs. Vance," Alistair repeated. "My advice, as a former acquaintance, would be to contact a litigation attorney immediately. The demand for rent is valid under the contract terms. You have until 5 p.m. today to remit the payment, or WC Holding Corp. will file for a writ of ejectment. Good day." The line went dead. Ethan and Serena stared at the phone, then at the sprawling $30 million mansion around them. It was no longer theirs. It was a prison they were trapped in until they were forcibly removed. The humiliation was total. Ethan, in a feverish panic, immediately called his mother. The cell phone rang several times, then went to voicemail. He tried the Meadowbrook number. A receptionist answered. "Room 106, please," Ethan demanded. "I'm sorry, sir. Mrs. Vance has explicitly instructed us not to transfer any calls to her room at this time. She is resting." "But I'm her son. This is an emergency. We need to talk to her about the house." "Sir, Mrs. Vance left very clear instructions. All emergency communication is to be routed through her legal counsel, Mr. Alistair Finch. You may reach him there." The line went dead. Ethan and Serena looked at each other, their faces mirrors of raw, desperate fear. They realized, with chilling clarity, that they were completely locked out, not just of the house, but of the woman they had so carelessly discarded. "She did this," Serena whispered, her voice laced with venom. "The old woman planned this. She's had a secret lawyer all this time. She set us up." "But how? Why?" Ethan roared, slamming his fist against a priceless antique table, making the champagne glasses rattle. "She has nothing. She's always been poor. She depends on the trust income." The irony was now crushing. They had created the perfect villain and the perfect scenario for their mother's quiet demise, believing her weakness was a guarantee of their success. Instead, they had activated a time-delayed bomb of Thomas Vance's making, with Ellie's cold, calculated finger on the detonator. Ellie Vance, sitting alone in room 106, had a simple breakfast, a cup of weak coffee and toast, and waited for the sound of the 8 o'clock news. She didn't need to see them to know the chaos she had unleashed. She only needed the knowledge of her own strength. The pain of yesterday had been transmuted into an unstoppable force. She had 48 hours. 48 hours until the deadline passed and the law came to claim Willow Creek, the place they had treated as a trophy, not a home. Her eyes drifted to the window, watching the mundane traffic pass by in Bridgeport. She felt a profound, chilling sense of peace. The hardest part, the emotional plunge into the bottom of the U, was over. Now came the ascent, the cold, silent administration of justice. She was no longer a victim. She was the architect of their ruin. She had to wait. Wait until the final brutal scene played out in Greenwich, while she sat, utterly calm, in the forgotten corners of Bridgeport. She had to ensure the lesson was absolute, public, and irrevocable. The house was hers, and they were, as of 5 p.m., utterly and irrevocably homeless. The real cost of their greed was coming due. The next 24 hours unfolded with the glacial, terrifying precision of a well-oiled machine, exactly as Eleanor Vance had planned 5 years earlier. In the sterile, airless confinement of room 106 at Meadowbrook, Ellie maintained a composure so absolute it felt like an armored shell. Her grief had been transmuted entirely into strategy. She was a general commanding the battlefield from a silent, forgotten bunker. She refused to engage in the reality of her physical surroundings. The bland institutional meals, the distant cries from other residents, the persistent smell of stale coffee and industrial cleaner, none of it penetrated her internal focus. Her world had shrunk to the cold, hard facts of the legal papers, the ironclad clauses, and the ticking clock counting down to 5 p.m. the following day. Her only point of external contact was the brief, clinical call she made to Alistair Finch exactly at noon. "Alistair, an update, please. I assume my son has contacted you?" she asked, her voice flat, devoid of the maternal warmth he remembered. "Mrs. Vance, he has contacted me, repeatedly. He is highly agitated, as is Serena. They are frantic, as expected. They are currently attempting to secure a temporary injunction based on the premise that the WC Holding Corp. Is acting in bad faith. Their current lawyer is arguing that the clause regarding your occupancy is unconscionable and was never properly explained to Mr. Vance," Alistair reported, his tone indicating his professional amusement at the futile defense. Ellie's lip curved faintly. "And what did you advise?" "I advised their counsel that any attempt to obtain an injunction would be immediately and vigorously contested, complete with the full, unredacted history of the Vance Investment Trust, the one they don't know exists, to prove the holding corp's legitimate financial standing. That was sufficient to stall their litigation efforts. They realize they are fighting a ghost with limitless resources." "Excellent. And the payment deadline?" "Set for 5 p.m. tomorrow. They have been notified that without the full payment of $960,000 in certified funds, the writ of ejectment will be filed first thing the following morning, with a sheriff's deputy scheduled for eviction at 11 a.m. Mrs. Vance, they are out of options. They are trying to liquidate assets now, but nothing moves that fast. Not a single asset." "They are trying to call me?" Ellie asked, gazing impassively at a stain on the ceiling tile. "They are. Non-stop. They believe you are the only one who can call off the dogs. They have not yet grasped that the dogs belong to the corporation, and the corporation is indifferent to family sentiment." "They should have learned that lesson yesterday," Ellie murmured. "Do not answer any of my son's calls. Do not give them any hope of negotiation. I want them to experience the full, absolute silence of the power structure they dismissed. Thank you, Alistair. I'll speak to you at 11:30 a.m. tomorrow, after the arrival." She hung up the phone. The phone calls, however, kept coming, vibrating Ellie's small, outdated burner phone with frantic regularity. She let it ring, watching the names flash across the screen. Ethan, home. Serena, cell. Ethan, office. It was a digital testament to their descent into chaos, and she watched it with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying a species in decline. At the Willow Creek residence, the panic had escalated into a full-blown meltdown. Ethan was pacing the expansive marble foyer, his hands knotted in his hair, the remnants of yesterday's party serving as a mocking backdrop to his desperation. Empty champagne bottles littered the console where the eviction notice had been casually tossed. Serena was on her third glass of wine, even though it was only early afternoon, her carefully constructed facade of social grace crumbling into raw, ugly fear. She was screaming into her phone at her personal assistant, demanding that her jewelry be appraised immediately. "Call Sotheby's. Call Christie's. See what they can give us for the 4-carat cushion cut. No, not a consignment. I need liquid cash, Alice. $960,000. Today. Do you understand? Or we will be on the street. Literally on the goddamn street." Ethan threw himself onto the custom-made sofa, burying his face in the silk cushions. "It's impossible, Serena. That ring is only worth $400,000 on the spot, maybe $300,000 after the fees. And we still owe the bank on the car. We're short by almost $600,000. We've exhausted the lines of credit. Nobody approves that kind of unsecured loan in 5 hours. Then call your mother, Serena shrieked, throwing the phone down. She's the only one. She has to call Finch. She set this up, Ethan. She knows who the owner is. She's playing some cruel, twisted game. Tell her we'll move her back. Tell her we'll sell the Range Rover. Tell her anything. But call her. Ethan picked up the phone, dialing Meadowbrook again. He was met with the same cold, pre-recorded message about resting hours and the redirect to Alistair Finch. The anonymity of WC Holding Corp. Was the final brilliant stroke of cruelty. They couldn't fight it because they couldn't identify the attacker. They couldn't appeal to the owner because the owner was a legal phantom, shielded by layers of corporate documentation. The sheer weight of the wealth behind the corporation implied an opponent too powerful to challenge. "She's not answering," Ethan yelled, throwing the phone across the room. It shattered against the wall. "She's doing this to us, Serena. She's doing this because we put her in that wretched, smelly place. She's punishing us. She's $700,000 rich from the trust, and she's trying to destroy her only son over a geriatric facility in Bridgeport. She's deranged," Serena cried, pulling at her hair. She had completely miscalculated her mother-in-law's assets, vastly underestimating the Vance Trust's actual liquid worth, which she assumed had been depleted by years of high living and property taxes. If only she knew the true fortune was secured in an unassailable trust, immune to her husband's greed. They spent the remainder of the day in a frenzied, useless haze of calls to brokers and bankers, each one ending in the same frustrating realization. Liquidity in that amount required time, and they had none. They watched their financial lives, built on the shifting sand of inherited expectation, dissolve into the air. In Meadowbrook, Eleanor Vance was having a visitor, not a concerned neighbor, not a sympathetic friend, but a highly discreet woman named Agent Harris from Alistair Finch's security detail. Harris was a calm, capable woman in her mid-30s, dressed in a simple blouse and slacks, looking entirely out of place in the institutional setting. "Mrs. Vance, I'm here to ensure your peace and quiet. Mr. Finch informed me that your son may try to come here in person as a last resort," Agent Harris said, her voice low and efficient. Ellie nodded, looking up from the leather-bound notebook she was meticulously reviewing, the notebook containing the exact clauses they had violated. "I appreciate the foresight, Agent Harris. I doubt they have the clarity of mind for a physical confrontation, but one must always anticipate desperation." "Indeed, ma'am. My instructions are simple. Prevent any entry to room 106 by unauthorized persons. If Mr. Vance attempts to breach, I am to inform the facility manager immediately and cite restraining order protocol, even if one is not technically in place yet. The threat of legal action against Meadowbrook's license will be sufficient to secure the premises." "Very good," Ellie said. "Agent Harris, I have one request. Do you have access to a local news stream? I would prefer the Connecticut News 8 evening broadcast." Agent Harris produced a small, high-end tablet from her shoulder bag. "Channel 8, live feed at 6 o'clock. No problem, Mrs. Vance." Ellie settled back onto the thin bed, watching the clock tick towards the 6 o'clock hour. This was not about revenge. This was about witnessing the public unveiling of justice. The U-curve demanded that the perpetrators recognize the full extent of their error. At 6:02 p.m., the local news cut to a live remote segment. The reporter, an earnest young man with a microphone, was standing directly outside the massive wrought-iron gates of the Willow Creek residence. The gates, once a symbol of their untouchable status, were now their gilded cage. And tonight, here in the heart of Greenwich, an extraordinary piece of high-stakes corporate drama is unfolding, the reporter announced, gesturing towards the imposing manor house. Sources confirm that the current occupants, High-profile social figures, Ethan and Serena Vance, are facing immediate eviction from this $30 million property. A holding corporation, identified only as WC Holding Corp., has successfully terminated the deed that permitted the Vances to reside here, demanding almost $1 million in back rent. Despite frantic legal efforts throughout the day, the Vances were unable to meet the 5 p.m. deadline. We are expecting the sheriff's deputies to arrive tomorrow morning to execute the writ of ejectment. Ellie watched the screen, her expression unreadable. The camera zoomed in on the large estate, the stone facade appearing cold and unwelcoming under the news lights. The reporter mentioned Ethan Vance's shocked silence and Serena Vance's hysterical refusal to comment when approached earlier in the day. She saw them briefly, in a shaky clip recorded by a telephoto lens. Ethan on the phone, his suit rumpled, his face etched with genuine, paralyzing terror. Serena pacing the front lawn, smoking furiously, her usual socialite elegance completely gone, replaced by a desperate, trapped animal. The reporter concluded, "This is an unprecedented fall from grace for the young couple who less than 24 hours ago were celebrating a major renovation on this very property." It begs the question, who is the powerful entity, the WC Holding Corp., wealthy enough to reclaim a property of this magnitude, and why the sudden aggressive action against the Vance family? Back to you, Mark. Ellie quietly nodded to Agent Harris. "Thank you, Agent. You can turn it off now." The public narrative was established. They were not victims of a crazy, vindictive mother. They were victims of an unstoppable, mysterious corporate entity, the very kind of entity they had spent their lives trying to court and impress. Their humiliation was not personal, it was institutional, which was far worse for their social standing. The irony was the sweet sting she needed. The next morning, the day of the scheduled eviction, was cold and clear in both Bridgeport and Greenwich. Ellie rose early, dressed carefully in a simple but immaculate cream-colored wool dress, not the beige dress of the day she was dumped, but a new one, purchased with the initial small cash she carried in the briefcase. She felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The heavy cloak of maternal responsibility and obligation had been shredded. At 11 a.m., the time of the scheduled eviction, she was sitting in the facility's common area, pretending to read a worn copy of The Great Gatsby, waiting for Alistair Finch's call. The call came at 11:35 a.m. "Mrs. Vance, it's done. Executed perfectly." Alistair's voice was firm. "Sheriff's deputies arrived precisely at 11 a.m. Movers are currently placing all movable property, furniture, clothing, everything, onto a storage pod in the driveway. The locks have been changed. The property is now officially secured by WC Holding Corp." And Ethan and Serena? They resisted briefly, demanding to speak to the owner, threatening lawsuits. They attempted to enter the house one last time. The deputies were firm. Mr. Vance is currently sitting on the front lawn with several suitcases, and Mrs. Vance is attempting to contact the news crews who are already circling. The humiliation is total, Mrs. Vance. And their financial situation? The legal maneuver has been devastating. The banks have frozen any lines of credit against the house, which they believed was their collateral. Their personal savings are now dedicated to a storage unit rental and finding a temporary accommodation. They are, for all intents and purposes, financially crippled and publicly disgraced in their own social circle. They have nothing, Mrs. Vance. A powerful wave of emotion, neither triumph nor sadness, washed over Ellie. It was the feeling of absolute finality. The mission was accomplished. "Alistair," Ellie said, her voice regaining a hint of its old authority, "I need you to arrange for my transportation to Willow Creek immediately. I need to be there in an hour." "Are you certain, Mrs. Vance? I was instructed to maintain your distance. I need to witness the conclusion, Alistair. Not from a television screen, but in person. I need them to look at me, the person they discarded, and understand the source of the force that crushed them. Arrange a private sedan. I will see you there. Ellie hung up the phone. She walked down the hallway, retrieved her wool coat, and signed out at the front desk. Brenda, the cheerful but indifferent manager, didn't even look up. Ellie Vance, the poor old woman in room 106, was checking out after only 2 days. It was just another unremarkable statistic in the daily life of Meadowbrook. The drive from Bridgeport back to Greenwich was the longest hour of Ellie's life. She watched the landscape shift, the gradual transformation from faded storefronts and cracked pavement back to manicured lawns and towering gates. The change was a physical mirror of her emotional journey over the past 2 days, from the raw, ugly humiliation of Meadowbrook to the powerful, clear-eyed reality of Willow Creek. The black sedan pulled up to the curb just outside the Willow Creek gates. The scene was exactly as Alistair Finch described, amplified by the presence of 3 news vans and 2 reporters aggressively filming the drama. Ethan and Serena were still there. They were sitting on a stone bench near the gate, surrounded by their personal belongings. A few leather suitcases, Serena's prized designer handbag, and the shocking sight of their lives condensed into a pile of storage boxes. Ethan's expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. He looked 20 years older, the entitled sheen entirely wiped away by fear and lack of sleep. Serena was sobbing quietly, burying her face in her hands, her emerald green gown replaced by a simple but rumpled sundress. They were the very picture of defeated aristocracy. Alistair Finch met Ellie by the car. He looked concerned. "Mrs. Vance, they are distraught. Be careful. They might attempt confrontation." "I am counting on it, Alistair," Ellie said, walking with a steady, deliberate pace towards the gates. She didn't look frail anymore. She looked monumental. As she approached the property, the movers, the deputies, and the reporters all stopped. The silence that fell over the scene was heavier than the $30 million weight of the house itself. Everyone recognized the elderly woman in the perfectly cut cream coat. Ethan saw her first. He shot up from the bench as if propelled by an electric current. "Mom!" he screamed, his voice breaking, running towards her, followed closely by a red-eyed, stumbling Serena. "Mom! You're here! Thank God! You're the only one who can stop this. Tell them, Mom. Tell WC Holding Corp. that this is a mistake. You know the owner, don't you? You must know the owner. It's one of Dad's old friends, isn't it? They're doing this for you." Ethan grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly hard, desperate. Serena staggered forward, kneeling slightly, her voice a ragged plea. "Mother Vance, please. We'll move you back immediately. We'll fire the contractors. We'll buy you a new wing. The best suite at St. Jude's. We'll hire a full-time nurse. Anything. Just tell them to stop. Tell the corporation that the owner. Tell them that WC Holding Corp. has reached an agreement with the Vances. We can't be on the street, Mum. Our reputation. Please." Ellie looked down at her son's desperate hand, gripping her arm, then at his face, distorted by terror and greed. The years of neglect, the casual cruelty, the cold dismissal, they all crystallized into this single, crushing moment. "Ethan," she said, her voice quiet, firm, and colder than the air in the Bentley 2 days ago. "Take your hand off me." He immediately released her, recoiling as if burned. He looked at her, his eyes searching her face for the familiar flicker of maternal weakness, the predictable surrender. But he found nothing, only an unnerving, absolute void. Serena rushed the gap. Mother Vance, this is monstrous. You are destroying your own son. What about family? What about your legacy? We are all you have left. What are you going to do with a $30 million house all by yourself in Bridgeport? You don't need it. Ellie ignored Serena. She looked only at Ethan. His eyes, the same color as Thomas's, were wide and pleading. She finally spoke, her voice carrying an authority that silenced the entire street, the news cameras, and the sheriff's deputies alike. I am not WC Holding Corp., Ethan, but WC Holding Corp. is a legal entity that honors contracts, something you clearly do not understand. They served you with a legal demand for rent, which you failed to meet. The consequences are now being enforced. Ethan shook his head frantically. But who is the owner, Mum? Tell me. Who is rich enough to do this? And why is this happening? Why did you let them do this to us? Ellie didn't answer the question directly. Instead, she took a slow, deliberate step back, distancing herself from the wreckage of their lives. She nodded once to Alistair Finch. Alistair stepped forward, holding a final single sheet of paper. He addressed Ethan and Serena with chilling formality. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, as legal counsel, I am instructed to inform you that your last appeal has been denied. The writ of ejectment is fully executed. Furthermore, any attempt to contact Mrs. Eleanor Vance, who is currently a secured, protected client of the Vance Investment Trust and in no way responsible for the actions of WC Holding Corp., will be met with immediate legal action. You are formally warned to stay away from Mrs. Vance and any property associated with the Holding Corp. Serena shrieked, a sound of raw, unadulterated devastation. The Vance Trust? What are you talking about? Ethan, what is he talking about? You said the trust was almost dry. You said we had to sell the property. Ethan looked at his mother, the last vestiges of hope collapsing into a horrifying realization. He finally understood the cold, crushing truth. The trust. It was never just for the house, was it, Mum? He whispered, his voice trembling. The trust owns the Holding Corp. And the trust belongs to you. Eleanor Vance stood utterly still. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. Her silence was a $50 million confirmation. She simply met his gaze, the silence stretching between them, until it became the sound of a final, irreversible goodbye. The final devastating blow was the realization that she had had the power all along, $50 million of it, and had deliberately allowed herself to be treated as a pauper for years, just to see the true measure of his character. He had failed the test, spectacularly. Ellie turned to Alistair Finch, her composure absolute. Alistair, I need you to place the Willow Creek residence on the market immediately. I do not wish to live here. It is tainted. The sentence was delivered with the quiet finality of a judge passing sentence. She walked back towards the waiting black sedan, leaving Ethan and Serena standing in the driveway, surrounded by their furniture, suddenly facing the impossible reality of their immediate, inescapable homelessness. Ellie got into the car. As the sedan pulled away, she looked out the window one last time. Ethan was slumped on the bench, his head in his hands. Serena was screaming curses at the departing news vans. The house, Willow Creek, looked vast and cold, a tombstone to the family that had died in its shadow. She closed her eyes, and a single hot tear finally escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness or even of triumph. It was the cost of freedom, the bitter, absolute knowledge that the maternal love that had sustained her for decades was now forever severed, replaced by the solitary dignity of self-respect. She had won, but the victory tasted of ash. The relationship was over. She was free. The black sedan accelerated smoothly, leaving the wreckage of Ethan and Serena's lives at the gates of Willow Creek residence far behind. Eleanor Vance did not look back. The single tear she had shed was the final purifying cost of her freedom, a small, transient symbol of the pain that was now irrevocably closed off. The cold, clear air of Greenwich gave way to the steady warmth of the sedan's climate control, mirroring the transition taking place within her. She was moving from the brutal climax of justice into the quiet aftermath of her own resurrection. Alistair Finch, seated beside her, cleared his throat, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Mrs. Vance, I've already contacted the necessary parties. Willow Creek is formally listed for sale as of 30 minutes ago. The price point is aggressive, reflecting the desire for a rapid closing. No expense was spared in securing the property. The deed transfer is already being executed by WC Holding Corp." Ellie opened her eyes, gazing out at the passing landscape of wealth and privilege, the very world that had corrupted her son. "And the proceeds, Alistair? They will be immediately directed where?" "To the Thomas and Eleanor Vance Endowment for Elderly Dignity," Alistair confirmed, consulting his tablet. "The paperwork is finalized. The initial capitalization will be the proceeds from the Willow Creek sale, plus an additional $10 million from the Vance Investment Trust. A total of close to $40 million, all dedicated to providing high-quality, non-institutional care for seniors who have been abandoned or neglected by their families. A direct countermeasure to places like Meadowbrook." Ellie finally permitted herself a small, faint smile. That was the real victory. Not the house, but the foundation built on the ashes of her betrayal. The transformation of her pain into a shield for others. "Good. That is excellent, Alistair. Now, my destination. I do not wish to remain in Connecticut. The past is too thick here. I have arranged a private transfer, Mrs. Vance. A jet is waiting at Westchester County Airport. Your destination, a private condominium in Palm Beach, Florida. It is a secure, luxurious, high-rise residence with panoramic views of the ocean. It was purchased 2 months ago, anonymously, using a sub-account of the trust. It is furnished exactly to your specifications: clean lines, modern elegance, and absolute peace." Ellie nodded, the plan unfolding precisely. "And my former residence in Bridgeport?" "We retrieved your leather briefcase and your small personal belongings from room 106 10 minutes after you left. The account at Meadowbrook is settled, and a full medical report has been requested. We are also pursuing a quiet investigation into the facility's care standards using the anonymity of the holding corp to ensure they cannot connect the action to you. Keep me apprised of that. I want that establishment investigated, not for my own sake, but for the other souls languishing there. Now, about Ethan and Serena." Alistair hesitated, something unusual for the seasoned lawyer. "They attempted to follow the car briefly. They were intercepted by my security detail. They have no resources, Mrs. Vance. Their entire financial identity was tied up in the perceived value of Willow Creek. They are facing immediate social ostracization. Their future is bleak. What, if anything, are your final instructions regarding them?" Ellie gazed out the window, watching the blur of trees and high stone walls. The pain of the last 2 days had refined her emotional palate. She no longer felt rage or vengeance, only a profound, cold indifference, tinged with sorrow. "My instruction is silence, Alistair. Absolute silence. The law has played its hand, and the justice it delivered was the termination of their privilege. They must now face the consequences of their character, unassisted and unimpeded by me. They are no longer my responsibility. They are merely strangers." The word hung in the air. Strangers. It was the final, most devastating blow, worse than the eviction, worse than the financial ruin. It was the complete, categorical termination of the relationship. The death of the mother. The jet journey south was a restorative experience. Eleanor, wrapped in a plush cashmere blanket, watched the northern landscape disappear beneath the clouds. The ascent felt like a physical shedding of the decades she had spent subordinating her life and her considerable fortune to the illusion of being a supportive, quiet, and ultimately disposable mother. She realized then that her secret fortune, the $50 million meticulously accumulated through Thomas's initial foresight and her own disciplined investment strategy, had not been about the money itself. It had been about self-worth. For years, she had deliberately chosen invisibility, living in the shadow of their contempt, simply to test the core of her son's love. She had allowed herself to be treated as a burden, to see if he would ever look past the perceived poverty and see the human being who raised him. He had failed, and the cost of that failure was his entire life. She arrived in Palm Beach, where the air was thick with the scent of salt and hibiscus. The condo was everything Alistair promised, an expanse of polished stone and glass overlooking the endless turquoise of the Atlantic Ocean. It was a space designed for tranquility and reflection, a world away from the beige walls and stale air of Meadowbrook. That evening, Eleanor stood on her balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in colours too vibrant for the controlled palettes of Greenwich society. She was alone, completely and utterly, but the solitude was a relief, a palpable sense of peace. The silence was the sound of a toxic connection finally snapping. The next few months were dedicated to living. Eleanor did not rush to fill the void. She began the transformation into the woman she was always meant to be. She hired a small, discreet staff, started reading again, not the classics, but contemporary history and philosophy. She spent her mornings walking the beach, feeling the sand beneath her feet, the sun on her skin, reclaiming the physicality that her illness and her son's neglect had almost stolen. The news, relayed through Alistair, was sporadic and clinical. Ethan and Serena had vanished from the Greenwich scene. They had secured a tiny, cramped rental apartment in a less than desirable suburb of Stamford, living off the meagre proceeds from Serena's hurriedly sold jewellery. The disgrace was complete. They were bankrupt, socially exiled, and their attempts to re-enter the social world were met with cold dismissal. They were the subject of gossip, a cautionary tale about entitlement and sudden ruin. They were nobody. They continued to attempt contact, emails full of incoherent apologies, accusations, and desperate pleas, all addressed to the anonymous WC Holding Corp, demanding negotiation. They never dared to address Eleanor directly. They believed their mother was still a weak, easily manipulated woman, but they feared the corporate entity that had crushed them. This inability to connect the powerful trust to the poor, discarded mother was the final layer of her defense, a firewall of their own making. Eleanor never responded. She directed Alistair to send one final boilerplate legal notice. The matter is closed. Further communication will be treated as harassment. The ultimate peak of the U-curve was not the act of vengeance at the auction, but the profound realization that followed. The moment of justice had come and gone, and she was left only with the choice of what to do with the rest of her life. The triumph felt hollow, because the loss of her son, even the cold, avaricious version of him, was still a loss. But she understood that mourning the end of a toxic relationship was necessary for her own survival. Her most significant moment came during the official launch event for the Thomas and Eleanor Vance Endowment for Elderly Dignity. The event was held in a magnificent beachfront ballroom in Palm Beach, attended by philanthropists and community leaders. Ellie, elegant and composed, gave her first public address in decades. She spoke not of her wealth, but of dignity. "The greatest robbery that happens to the elderly is not financial," Eleanor said, her voice resonant and clear, amplified across the silent room. "It is the theft of their self-worth. It is the belief that their life and their presence are a burden, a calculation of costs and benefits. They are discarded not because they are broken, but because their families are spiritually bankrupt. This endowment is here to say, unequivocally, you are not a burden. You are invaluable." As the applause erupted, she felt the final, definitive release she had been seeking. The energy she had spent on resentment and planning was now redirected toward purpose. She had transformed the wreckage of her family into a beacon of hope for strangers. The years passed. Eleanor thrived. She traveled. She took up painting. She managed her philanthropic foundation with the shrewdness Thomas had taught her. She became known in Palm Beach society not as the former wife of Thomas Vance, but as Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the quiet, powerful philanthropist with an aura of serene wisdom and an unmistakable, iron-hard resolve. One afternoon, 3 years after the eviction, Alistair Finch arrived at the condo with his briefcase. He looked solemn. "Mrs. Vance, I have a sensitive matter. Ethan and Serena have separated. They lost the Stamford apartment and are reportedly living rough. Ethan recently made a last-ditch effort. He wrote a personal letter to you. He managed to circumvent all the corporate firewalls and sent it to my private office. I am legally obligated to show you this, as it pertains to the trust." Alistair placed a worn, folded envelope on the polished glass table. It was addressed to Mum. Eleanor looked at the envelope. She didn't touch it. She looked at the handwriting, the familiar sloping script of the boy who used to write her sweet notes on Mother's Day. The silence of the ocean outside filled the room. "Did you read it, Alistair?" "I read it. It is a full confession, Mrs. Vance. He admits the initial lie about the finances, the deliberate choice of Meadowbrook to humiliate you, and the total lack of regret until the moment the sheriff arrived. He acknowledges his own avarice. He does not ask for money. He asks only for forgiveness and a chance to explain how he became that person." Ellie stared at the letter for a long minute. Forgiveness. It was the only thing she hadn't claimed in her triumphant ascent. She had claimed justice, dignity, freedom, and purpose. But forgiveness remained an unreached summit. Forgiving him felt impossible. It meant acknowledging the depth of the wound he inflicted. But then she thought of the old woman she had been, the woman who had chosen to be small, to be a sacrifice. She realized that the forgiveness he truly needed was not hers to grant. "Alistair," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "Burn the letter. Tell me nothing of its contents. My relationship with my son ended when he decided my life was disposable. He must find his peace elsewhere, not through me." She watched Alistair take the letter and place it back into his briefcase. Her decision was not cruel. It was an act of profound self-preservation. She had to forgive not him, but the part of herself that had allowed the abuse to happen. The final act of justice was the protection of her own peace. The true resolution, the final, perfect peak of her emotional journey, was the understanding that she had stepped out of the role of mother, victim, and avenger, and into the role of Eleanor Vance, a woman whole and complete. The house was merely a tool. The real prize was the silence that now filled her life, a silence earned through years of sacrifice and 2 days of absolute, unwavering resolve. She walked to the balcony, feeling the warm, salt-laced wind lift her hair. The ocean stretched out before her, vast and indifferent to human drama. She had survived the fire of betrayal, and used the ashes to build a new life, a new legacy, and a new self. Her victory was never about the price of the house. It was about the absolute, non negotiable value of her own dignity. She bought back her life from the ruins of their greed. She had walked through the valley of the shadow of abandonment and emerged not seeking vengeance, but demanding peace. The painful severance of that toxic relationship was the truest form of self-love she had ever known. She found not just justice for the betrayal of a son, but profound forgiveness for the mother she had been, the one who had sacrificed her own needs for too long. She had finally learned to value her own presence, her own desires, and her own peace over the comfort and convenience of others. She was reborn, not as the mother of Ethan, but as Eleanor, free, solvent, and entirely at peace.